let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unravel a massive prehistoric mystery that was hidden deep, deep underground. It's a totally chance discovery that honestly completely rewrote our understanding of ancient engineering, international trade, and just how deeply connected our ancestors truly were. We're talking about an ancient superhighway that predates modern infrastructure by thousands of years.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the scene. You're in the bustling coastal town of Dover over in the UK. Modern road construction is in full swing. Heavy machinery is roaring, digging way down into the earth. And then, out of nowhere, everything just stops. What could possibly be buried 6 meters, that's nearly 20 feet, beneath the pavement that would bring a massive multi-million-dollar infrastructure project to a grinding immediate halt?
Well, the date is September 28th, 1992. Workers are busy digging a deep drainage shaft for the new A20 road link, which, ironically enough, is meant to connect Dover to the brand new Channel Tunnel. So, right in the middle of building the very first land link between Britain and the continent in 10,000 years, archaeologists working on the site spot something incredible at the bottom of this shaft. It wasn't just some old piece of wood. It was an absolutely impeccable, heavily engineered ancient oak vessel. What happened next was an absolutely frantic rescue mission. You see, the second these ancient, waterlogged timbers hit the open air and were exposed to oxygen, they started to rapidly decay. So the archaeologists were literally in a race against time. The drainage shaft was super narrow, and digging further out would have actually compromised the nearby buildings, so they had to make the agonizing but totally necessary decision to cut this fragile 9.5-meter boat into exactly 32 pieces. Yeah, 32. It was the only way they could safely hoist the whole shebang out by crane before it was ruined forever. Once those pieces were safely recovered and sent off for conservation, the radiocarbon dating results came back and just stunned everyone. 1550 BC. That means this vessel is roughly 3,500 years old, making it the world's oldest known seagoing boat. To really put that into perspective for a second, this absolute masterclass in maritime engineering predates the Channel Tunnel it was found right next to by over 3 millennia. No way, right? And the engineering here, it's just astonishing. I mean, these prehistoric shipwrights built this thing without a single metal nail, and the boat doesn't even have a traditional keel. So how on earth was it seaworthy? Well, they used a bizarre but genius 3-step process. First, they hewed these incredibly thick planks straight from oak trunks, leaving these upstanding wooden blocks known as cleats. Second, they stitched the curving side planks to the flat bottom using twisted, flexible branches of yew wood. And finally, they caulked the seams with moss, held it all in place with thin wooden strips called laths, and basically waterproofed the whole thing with a mixture of beeswax and animal fat. And this brilliantly illustrates just how totally we have misunderstood ancient technology. For the longest time, people just assumed Bronze Age tools were way too primitive to pull off this kind of precise woodworking. But look at this quote from Robin Wood. He's an experimental archaeologist who actually went and built a replica of this boat. He pointed out that bronze tools behave entirely differently than modern steel. Instead of just aggressively chopping, they follow the natural fibers of the wood, effectively peeling away multiple small strips to create these incredibly intricate waterproof joints. The contrast here is just fascinating. These primitive-sounding bronze tools, often palstave axes, were actually incredibly soft. If you look at the Rockwell hardness scale, they measure under 40. That is literally softer than hot steel. You'd normally think a tool that soft would be completely useless against something as tough as oak. But no, the Bronze Age shipwrights knew exactly how to work with the material. They spent thousands of hours perfecting this craft, creating a watertight, highly sophisticated vessel using tools that we modern folks initially completely dismissed. But, you have to ask, why go through all this trouble to build a seagoing boat in the first place? Well, we have to zoom out and look at a massive macroeconomic problem of the Bronze Age. The defining tech of the era is obviously bronze. But to make bronze, you need 2 very distinct ingredients, copper and about 5 to 10% tin. The problem? The main source of tin was in Cornwall, way out in the far west of Britain. But the copper and the finished metal styles that were popular in southeast England came from Central Europe and the Alps. So you have these 2 crucial ingredients separated by hundreds of miles. This boat was basically the solution to that massive supply chain issue. When archaeologists examined the bottom of the boat, they didn't find much at first. It looked like it had been deliberately abandoned. But they did find one tiny, absolutely crucial clue: a single piece of shale. Lab analysis proved this piece of shale came from Dorset, which is over 220 kilometers away. This proved the vessel wasn't just some local fishing skiff. It was a bona fide Bronze Age cargo ship, connecting distant lands and moving vital raw materials, like tin, along the coast to major trade hubs. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it perfectly explains the root of this prehistoric trade. Why did Kent in the east become the superhighway to Europe rather than Cornwall where all the tin actually was? Well, if you look at the geography, a direct western route from Cornwall to Brittany is over 100 kilometers of highly unpredictable, dangerous, open ocean. And remember, these boats didn't have keels and were literally stitched together. They couldn't survive that kind of journey. Instead, the eastern route through Kent offered a much safer, coast-hugging journey with just a short 32-kilometer hop across the Straits of Dover. So Kent naturally became the undisputed gateway to the continent.
Of course, to fuel a massive international trade network of this scale, simple bartering just wasn't gonna cut it. You needed a reliable medium of exchange. Enter the American socketed axe. Tens of thousands of these things have been found across Brittany, the Isle of Wight, and Kent. They're made of lead bronze, have a super high tin content, and crucially, they're totally blunt and completely useless as actual tools. Archaeologists now believe these were an early, mutually agreed upon physical currency. Think about that. 3,500 years ago, our ancestors were using standardized, non-functional metal objects to grease the wheels of an international supply chain. Real game-changer stuff.
And this trade route was so bustling that it actually started to erase cultural borders. On both sides of the English Channel, over in Kent, northern France, and Belgium, archaeologists keep finding the exact same things. I mean, people were building identical house structures, using similar tools and pottery, and even practicing shared burial rites. They weren't divided by the sea at all. They were part of a heavily connected Bronze Age Euro region, completely bound together by the waters they sailed.
So the crucial point is, what actually caused this thriving maritime superhighway to collapse? Well, it was a massive technological disruption. Around 500 BC, iron emerges as this plentiful, technologically superior material, specifically the Hunsrück/Eifel region in modern-day Germany and Belgium, started heavily exploiting their rich iron ores. And the thing about iron is, it doesn't require a complex transcontinental supply chain of tin and copper. You can source and forge it locally. So almost overnight, that entire complex bronze economy and the stitched-together boats that sustained it became totally obsolete.
Looking at the timeline here, you can really see the sheer speed of this rise and fall. Back in 1550 BC, the bronze maritime network is at its absolute peak. That's right when our Dover boat is out there sailing. But by 500 BC, the rapid adoption of iron just collapses the entire route. Trade shifts entirely southward, going over the Alps, completely bypassing the English Channel. And it isn't until around 150 BC, when the expanding Roman world starts demanding new markets, that the eastern route through Kent is finally reestablished.
What you really should take away from this is just how devastating a global technological shift can be on a local economy. When that bronze trade died, Kent, which had been this bustling, wealthy hub of northern Europe, collapsed into sheer isolation. The artifactual evidence shows a steep decline in settlements. In fact, while the rest of Europe was moving forward into the sophisticated Iron Age, the isolated coastal communities of northern Gaul and Britain remained culturally stuck in the Bronze Age for centuries. They were just completely cut off. But you know, the legacy of those incredible ancient shipwrights definitely lives on. Bringing this whole story full circle back to the modern day. In 2012, an international team of archaeologists and ancient woodworking specialists decided to put it to the test. They successfully built a half-scale replica of the Dover boat, aptly naming it Boat 1550 BC. And despite a few initial teething troubles, the replica successfully took to the sea right off the coast of Dover. It definitively proved once and for all the true seaworthiness of our prehistoric ancestors' stitched-together design. So what does this all mean? Well, this brings us to a final provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. We so often look at a map and view oceans and channels as natural borders, right? Like impassable barriers that naturally keep cultures separate and isolated. But the Dover Bronze Age boat proves the exact opposite. 3,500 years ago, the sea wasn't a wall, it was a highway. It was the very thing that connected different lands, fueled a shared currency, and created a beautifully shared culture. So ask yourself, the next time you look out at the water, has the ocean historically been a geographic barrier that divides us, or the ultimate bridge that connects us? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.